often causes feedback. P's
How?
also, the k sound and the ch sound. Also, the P's can also cause a lot of feedback. So I've also heard people say checkpoint, checkpoint. That way you get the t, the p, the ch,
And the k.
and the k.
Or you could say "Pakacha."
I demanded, pleaded, called God on promises, and was like, you have to show up or I am done. And he did. And he did.
That's something to really think about. What does it mean that the God of the universe loves me?
Are we saying that our God is bigger than their God, or what?
Man, you got my mind going crazy right now.
I just think that is evangelical bullshit.
And I don't fit in their box anymore. So feeling rejected from the church makes me feel far away from God.
If I'm living out the love of God, love of the divine, then in some ways we're unoffendable.
It's wrong to marginalize anybody for any reason.
Sometimes we can just have some things about our perspective that's off until we encounter someone who can challenge our thoughts, have conversations with us, and we just continue to grow and evolve.
I'm with you there. Yeah, I like that.
That sounded like womp, 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 womp to Rob.
I'm a hardcore gospel lover. I do love the gospel. I just think we get it wrong.
Girl, I was so highly medicated, I don't even know if you Oh, God, my people.
Let's just say you hand someone over, hey, here's a game that I wrote down that would be fun for you to play. I don't even have context for that. I know when you open Candyland and you read the directions, you roll the dice and you move the guy around. What does it even look like for you to create a Dungeons & Dragons game?
I have found an incredible beauty in collaborative storytelling, in games, in community that rises around them. Sitting around with your friends on a Friday night for 3 hours creates friendships, it creates connection, you build something together. My goal for the podcast is to try and ease some of the fears that people may have around role-playing games and Dungeons & Dragons specifically.
Yeah.
Because I think there is a lot of good that can be found there.
You sure you're comfortable with him doing something? Because I don't know what it looks like.
I don't think you're going to cast some crazy spell on us. I think we'll be fine.
He's a warlock.
I'm not.
Don't say that, Joey.
Doing a good job, man.
Yeah,
she's already invested.
Right? What do
You've already got demons around you. The demons got you. Amy's like, I love role-playing games. I actually remember telling our tech team when we were starting the James Allen Seacoast, I was like, so how old would you have been in 2008? 16 or 17?
Yeah, that was 17.
Yeah. Yeah, so I remember telling them, yeah, we got a 17-year-old that's going to come in and run. And they were all very, very skeptical. It's like, oh, great. Thanks a lot for the great help.
I remember
After
that.
one Sunday, they're like, he's true geek. He knows his stuff. So this is a first. We have someone who grew up in a youth group that I led with us.
That's right.
It's David Schirduan, everybody.
Yep. The fruits of Joey's mistakes come back to haunt him.
He lives to tell.
That's right. I'm breaking it all wide open.
I mean, and what's so crazy is 33 years old. That's just, that's mind-boggling.
That's what happens when you're an old man.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. So you're a software engineer.
Yep.
So you're very smart.
No.
Come on.
The computers do the math. That's the secret. They don't tell you that when they tell you how much they make, but the computers do all the math.
Okay. You're also very smart. Do you have any funny old youth group stories?
Yeah, so the one that I immediately thought of when Joey asked me for an old youth group story, I remember Joey was giving a message on something, and I don't remember what it was about because it was very boring. And Joey realized it was boring, and he kicked the podium down. in front of everybody. He kicked it down. All his papers went flying. He said, "Pay attention."
Did I really?
Oh, yeah. And I remember that moment, but I don't remember what the rest of it was about.
That is awesome. That is awesome. So I didn't ruin your life? I didn't ruin your faith?
I have no legally binding accusations to make during this podcast, but I hold the trauma deep inside.
That's funny. So I wanted to start. We just had dinner with Louie Bookfor, who's a dear friend of all of ours, and rest in peace, Rick. Her husband just passed away, I guess, a little over a month ago. Well, the story that she told me recently, and then she told you guys over dinner, is Andrew, who is your age, David. He had a Pokemon collection, Pokemon card collection. I don't know anything about Pokemon other than their cards, and grown men go looking for little animated things that don't really exist. Well, anyway, she believed that, I think she asked someone at her church, "Hey, give me the rundown on Pokemon," and whatever answer she got, it was like, "Oh no, we need to burn these." And so to this day, Andrew, who is also in his early 30s, is like, "Yeah, we just burned up thousands and thousands of dollars worth of stuff," because it was, what is Pokemon, David? I don't even know anything about Pokemon.
So Pokemon is a card game. And
it's a card game.
It is a card game.
So the cards that people collect, they're actually for playing?
They are for playing. The video game came afterwards, but both share the same theme, which is a young boy leaves town. He catches these monsters and trains them and uses them to fight other monsters and becomes the best monster trainer.
So your parents did not let you have Pokemon cards?
Correct.
Now, what was their rationale? What was Louie's rationale? Are you aware of the pushback when it comes to Pokemon?
Oh, yes. So part of the pushback is the idea that you summon these creatures and they're a source of power for children, which there was opposition to. My parents specifically called out how violent the Pokemon were described. They were always described as like, this one can burn at 1,000 degrees and sear the flesh off your bones.
Yeah.
And they did not like the idea that we were using creatures to harm people. That was their opposition.
Gotcha. Hearing what you just heard, do red flags go up with what we're talking about, Pokemon? Or you're like, yeah, if I had a little kid right now, I wouldn't let him have Pokemon cards either.
No, I wouldn't let my kid have Pokemon cards.
You would not?
No.
Right. Right. So the last time we kind of talked about this kind of stuff was when Matt Oxley was trying to get you to read a satanic Bible or to have it in your house.
Or just like walk by one.
Right.
I was like, no, thank you.
And here, I want to cut to the chase. Here's the reality is how I was raised. I feel very similar. I don't think I'm as extreme, but the center of discussion is going to be Dungeons and Dragons. And I would put that in the same category. And where I want to be educated, I'd put it in the same category as Ouija boards, tarot cards. It's all stuff that you just keep away, sort of thing. So I've been dying to tell you this, David. So my grandparents, they would take us to quick trips to Myrtle Beach and spoil me and my brother. Well, we come back one time, and the only thing that we brought home is the only thing they bought us, which we just loved. We both got a Dungeons and Dragon figurine. So we were just like, oh, this is what this, we're back from vacation. Look what we have and everything. My parents saw them and they were like, that's Dungeons and Dragons. And we were like, yeah. We had a family devotion that night that culminated in us pulling those bastards apart. So our devotion wrapped up by violently pulling the limbs off of these figurines and throwing them in the trash can.
I bet that was a little bit fun, wasn't it, Joey?
Yeah, it kind of
Just
was.
a little bit.
Ruining toys. So Dungeons and Dragons, you would not have been able to do that as a kid?
Definitely not.
And I would imagine your parents, who I love dearly, still probably are in a place where they don't like it, or do you think over time they have warmed up to it?
We've had lots of discussions about it because I publish books and I write books for games like Dungeons and Dragons. There's still some resistance from their perspective.
Yeah. Now, when did you start really getting into this kind of thing?
So a lot of video games are inspired by Dungeons and Dragons. And so a lot of the terminology of Dungeons and Dragons is familiar to me as someone who plays a lot of video games. games that have hit points and do damage and you cast like a magic spell. There's a lot of video games like that. And those sorts of things can be traced back to the tabletop role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons.
Gotcha.
And so that was already familiar to me. I was very I knew the language. I understood how the game works.
Yeah. So when I hear the very phrase Dungeons and Dragons, it's like a thing goes off in my head, and that kind of stuff you stay away from. But I have zero knowledge on any of this stuff. Like I seriously, I was told you never play with a Ouija board. I don't know why. Are my parents right that there's like some spiritual stuff that you don't want to mess with, or is it a harmless thing that people do? I have no idea. Dungeons and Dragons, we both share similar Christian faith, the three of us. So tell me what the pushback is and why it's unfounded. Or maybe you would be like, no, I see where they're coming from, but give us the scoop. Why is Dungeons and Dragons, to your best knowledge, why is it getting such a bad reputation amongst evangelical Christians?
For sure. Part of the reason is because it was popular in the 80s. Popular things tend to get targeted by Christian culture because they're popular. Nobody's hating on ska music,
Right.
But the other big thing is that Dungeons and Dragons came out of the war game community. So like reenacting old battles, that kind of a thing, evolved into sort of a Lord of the Rings inspired game where you and your friends go on an adventure. And the rules of the game became popular because it is essentially storytelling with your friends. Some of the marketing for Dungeons and Dragons relied on like villains, evil like lords that you would take down, like Sauron in Lord of the Rings. And as the culture kind of shifted, in an attempt to make Dungeons and Dragons cooler, a lot of the iconography doubled down on that idea. So there were lots of like covers with specifically images to bring up like the Christian demon, or images of like a creepy undead, evil looking thing, because even when you're selling products to a 13-year-old, that's cool. And it makes your mom mad, which is even cooler.
Yeah.
And so D&D kind of took a spiral where it purposefully catered to and leaned into this idea of like, yeah, we're doing edgy, weird stuff. Buy our books.
Yeah. So I don't hear any Christians getting upset about Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Star Trek. Is the distinction that this is something that you're not just watching and consuming as entertainment, but you're involved in it? You think that's kind of what people are antsy about?
I think there's and this is a thing that happens with, board games, video games, TV. There's a tension between pretending something and doing something. When you play, Mario, you take shrooms and you take
it's magic.
out. Yeah, exactly.
It's magic. Yeah.
Because it's for kids. We all understand that you use the mushroom so that you can break the blocks. You're not actually there to trip on psilocybin,
right?
Whatever.
Even though if you take enough mushrooms, you think you're a raccoon that flies.
Correct. But meanwhile, pointing to something that I find deeply uncomfortable is a horror movie, even though there's nothing going on in the real world. It's just a moving pictures on a screen. It upsets me and it hurts me, and I can't sleep well after I watch a horror movie. So there's a line somewhere in there, and I think the line's a little different for everybody.
A comfort level line or a moral line?
I think both. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's a comfort level line, and then I would hesitate to point at a moral line. But I do believe that there is one.
Yeah.
I mean, watching pornography, nothing's actually happening, but that crosses a moral line.
Right.
But Footloose has nudity in it. Does that make that a pornographic movie? This is a conversation we've been having as a culture for ever.
Yeah.
But also, too, like part of the scare with the satanic panic in the 80s with D&D, like part of it was completely unfounded. Like there were parents that started like groups. I think it's like BAD is one of them, which is like Believers Against Dungeons and Dragons. And there were parents that were like, my kid committed suicide. It's because of playing Dungeons and Dragons. And like a kid that got lost in like some tunnel somewhere, and they pointed to
Tom
that.
Hanks.
Yeah, that is right. And they did a whole movie on it. Yeah, mazes and
monsters.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of things in the 80s, I think, were extremes and probably not. I don't think you can find a lot of justification for them, but I do think that the original creators of Dungeons and Dragons, like they did kind of lean in hard before it got sold, and I think that they were trying to make sure after it sold, that company was trying to make sure like they capitalized, and they did use spells like as closely to real witchcraft as they could get because it rocketed sales. And there's also like a lot of criticism for Dungeons and Dragons, like with race, like everything was white. And then when they did integrate anybody of color, whether it was like Asians or Africans, it was like really derogatory. Like they're all like evil and bad. And so people had a big issue with that too. So I don't think
I'm going to cancel David. He's a racist.
Sorry, bro.
This whole time,
have you heard that? Have you heard that?
It's still a problem.
Yeah.
There was a large D&D book published about Native American cultures. No Native Americans were involved in the creating of that, and it was a huge controversy.
Wow.
One of our publishing companies, a small little we're just a group of friends, but we published a game set during the slave trade, where you play as characters who live in that world, and occasionally as slaves who live in that world. And we got a ton of incredible Black writers and artists to help us make sure that was sensitive and historical. But that could have been a reason to cancel me. Like that stuff has to be done with care and concern. And it's still difficult for a lot of larger companies to care about that.
Yeah. All right. So you showed me 2 of your books, and I'm looking through it. What does it mean when you say you write down games that people play? So let's just say you hand someone over, hey, here's a game that I wrote down that would be fun for you to play. Like, I don't even have context for that. I know when you open Candyland and you read the directions, you roll the dice and you move the guy around. What does it even look like for you to create a Dungeons and Dragons game?
Right. Dungeons and Dragons is a tabletop role-playing game. But there are lots of other tabletop role-playing games.
So you can go to a store or order on Amazon Dungeons and Dragons, and it's like it's a board game.
No. A tabletop role-playing game is a collaborative storytelling game that you play with your friends. There's a Star Trek tabletop role-playing game. There is a like World War II James Bond tabletop role-playing game. There's all kinds of different role-playing games, of which Dungeons and Dragons is one of them. So we can keep the conversation focused on D&D in particular, or we can branch out and talk about, like, is role-playing in general harmful? You know, if I pretend to be Captain Picard on the Enterprise and I shoot someone with a phaser, is that different than pretending to be a wizard shooting someone with a fireball? So I just want to clarify that Dungeons and Dragons is just one of a whole segment of games.
Right. I don't say this in any sort of denigrating way. Is it kind of like make-believe for adults sort of thing? Is there is there a competitive nature to it? Like, are you trying to win anything, or it's just...
It is purely collaborative.
Really?
And the mechanics of the game are such that the players tell the game master what they want to do.
Game master.
The game master.
Who's that?
One player is set aside and is in charge of running the game.
Gotcha.
And they interpret what the players want to do and describe the results of their actions. And whenever the group can't decide on what is going to happen, they roll dice to see what happens. Oh, I want to escape the guardsman after I stole a potato. Well, if you roll well enough, you escape the guard. If you don't roll well enough, you get captured and we have to break you out of jail. So it's all sort of improv storytelling with the dice there to add some unpredictability.
Gotcha. I mean, so would you liken it to we're going to get together and create like some sort of work of art that's a story? Like, we're going to come together and we'll always be able to look back on this time that we spent, and here's the story we came up with.
Yes.
Gosh, see, I have such little knowledge that I'm trying to take the context in. Like, I just don't have any knowledge or anything of this, so it's interesting.
Could we do a 5-minute play right now? Is that
Yeah.
okay?
No, I would love to get a feel. Wait, I don't know if Amy.
I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable.
I mean, I don't care in this context because it's not like
You want
a
some-
gateway or something for me. I don't feel
I
like
can
you know
find.
what I mean.
I think I have some old anointing oil.
I always have anointing oil.
Oh, she says oil.
I always say oil. Sorry.
Real quick before David does that, be honest, and I know you will. Is your level of understanding of Dungeons and Dragons probably not too deeper than me, but you are resistant because of the reputation that was handed down to you?
I think I know a little bit more than you because
Okay.
I do remember. I mean, they have a little part of it. Isn't it an ET? Like they're like rolling and the brothers making fun of them.
Yep. And in Stranger Things is the big one.
Stranger Things is the bigger one.
Yeah.
So, and like, I mean, mostly you like, I know there's like the dungeon master, whoever's like in charge. I know they have like the dice with like 500 faces. It's not really 500, but like 20 or so.
Close.
Yeah. They have tons of different dice.
Die. Yeah.
Whatever. So there's
No, die
many.
is one. Dice is two.
Okay. So several dice.
See, I'm smart too.
Yeah. Very good.
Proud of you, Joey.
Yeah,
And I
basic
know
words.
like even from like Big Bang, like, you know, it'll be like, so Sheldon would be like a dungeon master would be like, okay, you accidentally let out the Gorgon, like how are you going to get it back in its box or whatever? And he'd say, do you want to throw this, you know, spell, or do you want to do this? And then, you know, they pick and then they roll and then whatever. Like he said, whatever happens, like that's how the story progresses. There is like, isn't the dungeon master like mainly telling the story and giving like options, and they're kind of throwing in?
It can be that way. Usually the dungeon master brings half the game to the table, and then the players contribute. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but the dungeon master has the most information.
Where y'all expose, you would be more likely because of your age, you and I being similar in age, where we all both exposed to the whole backmasking of secular music, playing it backwards.
Oh, I heard. No.
We in youth group, we watched documentaries basically to scare the living hell out of us, and so we wouldn't listen to secular music. But here's what's funny is they would. So one of them that I can low hanging fruit is another one bites the dust. If you play it backwards, is start to smoke marijuana. It sounds like start to smoke marijuana. Well, my brother and I, we were in Play World, Toys R Us, whatever. There's no good toy stores anymore. But we were at one of those places where you can record yourself and then play it backwards. And so I said, another one bites the dust. And we played it backwards. It was like, start to smoke marijuana. And we were like, oh my gosh. So I think personally, when you play it backwards, it kind of sounds similar. And so then you have the power of suggestion. That's exactly what it's saying. The documentary wants you to believe that it's actual spiritual. Like there's no way that those words backwards would be start to smoke marijuana. But so you weren't scared away from all of that stuff?
Well, a little bit. So
You heard about this stuff?
Vaguely.
It
was before my time.
So my mom was very like, once I got old enough to understand like on my own, like I'd say like 10 around there, my mom joined like a Pentecostal church. And so it was just a lot of don't touch Ouija boards, don't watch scary movies, like playing records backwards. And my dad, you know, is like a huge music fan and actually had records and all that stuff, you know, like the cool records that everybody wants now. And I remember being afraid when he would play some of his music because I was like, oh my gosh, like what's going to happen to us if we're listening to it? I remember listening, like I love all that music now, like the Doobie Brothers or Steve Miller Band or something like that. But I remember listening to like the Steve Miller song where it was like black panties with an angel's face, you know, like that. And I'm like, oh my God, we're going to hell. This is sexual, like freaking out at like 12 years old. Like, why are we even listening to this? And in elementary school, like we made little Ouija boards with, like paper and like, you know, they worked. I swear they worked. And, a boy in my class, his mom called the school and was like, they're doing crazy stuff in this class. There's some girl leading all this. It was me.
Witchcraft is spreading.
I know. And it was like really bad. And then even as an adult, after I got married, my mother-in-law was talking about, do you remember that? Were you a part of that? there was some horrible girl that started all that.
You're like,
and I'm looking at Dick like, my husband, like, say nothing. He goes, yeah, I married her. And I was like, stop. Like, don't tell her.
Exposed.
Yes, it was the worst feeling. And she was like, it was you. And then I felt like she was going to throw anything all on me, but it was terrible. But yeah, I think all of those things seem scary to me, like, and like The Exorcist and any kind of like poltergeist, all those things were scary.
Right. Now, Dungeons and Dragons, was this just how I was cultured, or does that belong in the same category as Ouija board, tarot cards, or do you have a distinction in your head? Like, is any of that stuff you stay away from? Do you stay away from Ouija boards?
I do. There's a lot of stuff that makes me uncomfortable that isn't wrong, but there's a lot of things that is wrong and doesn't make me uncomfortable. So, you know, both camps. What makes role-playing games so interesting to me, and Dungeons and Dragons, for example, is that because it is made by the imaginations of everybody who's participating, one person's D&D game will look completely different from another person's D&D game. One group might be really excited about opening up a hot dog stand, and, you know, we go on adventures so that we can pay for the hot dog stand, and that's what we're passionate about. And that's actually happened in a game that I ran. I had my players get really excited about it. And another game will be something brutal where, you know, let's start a dog fighting ring and make them fight each other, and we'll describe... Right. So because RPGs are primarily from the people playing, it makes it even more muddy than like a movie or a song, because everyone's Dungeons and Dragons is going to look different.
When I hear RPGs, I think missile launcher. I had to think, okay, role-playing game.
Yes. The missile launchers, also morally gray.
All right, so you sure you're comfortable with him doing something? Because I don't know what it looks like.
No, I don't care. I don't think you're going to cast some crazy spell on us. I think we'll be fine.
He's a warlock.
I'm not.
Don't say that, Joey.
She's like, don't even say that.
No, that's bad.
I will say earlier, Amy, when you mentioned the Satanic Bible, so that was written by Anton LaVey.
I know, but it's still really bad.
I ran a small group for my church ministry in college. I ran a small group where we read the Satanic Bible and contrasted this with the Bible and what God's plan is for us. And it was really interesting. And we got a lot of value out of it, of like, this is what something without God can look like. Like, these are the kinds of attitudes and the kinds of goals that people can pursue without the, the benefit of the wisdom that we get from Jesus. And so that was a really interesting teaching tool. And we had a great way to break that down by looking at the opposite of what we're doing.
Yeah. And again, I would say that it's core in me. I would be uneasy with having a Satanic Bible in the house. Logically, I really don't think there would be any problems. I don't think it would cause any problems. But just how I was brought up, I'd be like, ooh, like, I mean, I was so crazy. I would have a Christian cassette. And if there was something in a song that I didn't think was accurate theologically, or maybe something that I think that I heard, or it wasn't Christian enough, I'd put the cassette tape out in the garage because I'm afraid like spirits are going to come out of the daggone thing. Like, so you would say that spirits can either attach or actually possess inanimate matter? I mean, because otherwise you would have no problem with having a Satanic Bible laying around.
Well, I mean,
there has to be a spiritual connection, right?
Yeah, I definitely think the spiritual realm is 100% real.
Right.
And I definitely think, like, Jesus cast demons into pigs, so I don't know that it could, like, a demon couldn't be cast into something else. You know what I mean? I don't necessarily think like lamps are going to come to life and start choking us out. You know what I mean? But I definitely think that the spiritual realm is underestimated, and it really shouldn't be. And I think it's not anything to play with. I mean, I don't think we are necessarily fully equipped. I mean, we know that around us all the time is spiritual warfare. And, you know, it even says in the Bible, if our eyes were open to see what was going on around us, we'd fall out, you know? I think it's a scary place to go. I just think it's something that we shouldn't mess with.
Yeah. So let me give you a very concrete example. Let's say someone a really random example, comes over to your house for dinner and they just came from a garage sale where they're like, oh, I know this is legit and it's a voodoo doll that they can, for some reason, know that it was actually used by a real witch. You would say, please get that out of my house, right?
I would say either you or this have to leave. Like, this is not welcome here.
So the only reason would be the potential for a spiritual connection with that, right? There would be nothing else. There would be nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah, I mean, and then I don't think it's necessarily like an unhealthy fear as it is.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not like an unfounded fear to me, but it's like I don't want anything encroaching in my space where I live and worship and abide and have children. And, you know, I don't want anything in that space that knowingly is used for evil. Yeah, absolutely. I don't want that in there.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah. What's your take on the inanimate matter stuff?
I'm not sure. I've seen things that I can't explain. And I do believe that the spiritual realm is real, that God's power is real. And that is kind of the defense that I take comfort in. Because I do publish tabletop role-playing games, I do rub shoulders with a lot of folks who are in the occult. That's tarot cards and dice and divination are closely aligned with a lot of Dungeons and Dragons stuff.
And tarot cards you stay clear from?
I do, because it makes me uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But I also believe that the power of Christ within me, the Holy Spirit, and my relationship that I have with the Lord protects me from a lot of that. So if, for example, I'm hanging out with a friend and he's got tarot cards in his back pocket, I don't fear that, because I believe if there is any sort of spiritual power in that, as a believer, I'm protected from that. But I also find that tarot cards make me deeply uncomfortable, and I would not feel comfortable using them because the guidance that I seek comes from God, not from cards.
Yeah. You have got to be a minority. There's not a whole lot of like Christians
I'm
that
white,
are
Joey.
huge into it. What?
I'm white.
You're what?
I'm white.
I was like, I didn't hear him. Now I heard him.
He's old.
Is there a lot of Christians that are as deeply involved in role-playing games like you?
There are a couple of us, but we are a minority.
Yeah.
And that honestly is one of the reasons why I came on the podcast, is because I have found an incredible beauty in collaborative storytelling, in games, in community that rises around them. Sitting around with your friends on a Friday night for 3 hours, storming the castle like Princess Bride. That's an amazing way to spend an evening. It creates friendships. It creates connection. You build something together. I love being a part of that in that community. And my goal for the podcast is to try and ease some of the fears that people may have around role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons specifically.
Yeah.
Because I think there is a lot of good that can be found there. And I would hate for someone to feel like you have to lock all the games away, which is why I would, to get on my soapbox, if Dungeons and Dragons makes you uncomfortable, go find a Star Wars role-playing game. Go find a Star Trek role-playing game. Go find a Lord of the Rings role-playing game. The newest version of the Lord of the Rings role-playing game is excellent, because I think that role-playing games are beautiful and they have the potential to bring a lot of joy, community, and beauty into your life.
All right, walk us through something like the three of us are getting together to do a role-playing game.
Right.
How does it start off?
What happens is we all gather in a place. We sit around a table.
We light candles and say like, "Hail Satan."
Not until after.
Hey, that's not even funny. Oh, shit.
Hey, behind the scenes information, him and I were texting back and forth about doing this conversation, and I said, hey, I'm also bringing someone who would be anti this stuff. He's like, whoa, I'm not confrontational type. I was like, I had to basically explain you're not gonna be mad about it.
I'm scared.
I'm so glad you're here.
I'm scary.
No, I'm so glad you're here, Amy. I really appreciate you.
Well, and I think one thing that's important to say is that like when in the 80s they were doing like a lot of the satanic panic stuff and they were coming against it, a lot of people started to do studies on role-playing games. And I mean, in preparing for this conversation, I was like, I need to, not be a total moron because I only have like a basic working knowledge. And one of the things it said is
leave that to me.
I was going to say,
I'll be the moron.
Joey's got us covered.
Because I do know some, you know what I mean? But just not enough. Like, I mean, I would never, I never had a reason to want to know. Like, I'm like, what I know is enough to say, like, it's not for me, But there are a lot of studies that are done that role-playing games have lots of benefits. I mean, I hate to say that because I feel like that doesn't really support my...
Yeah.
But, I mean, there are lots of benefits. They do say, like, it does, like, build camaraderie. It does help with imagination. It helps with this. It helps with that, It does help, like, sometimes kids that are more insecure to gain, like, build bonds and things like that. So there are positives, I think, to it. I just think, like, the Dungeons and Dragons side of it, like you said, there's a lot of violence in a lot of these things. And I don't think all of it is as simple as like the hot dog stand,
Right.
And that's where I think it would get sticky.
Gotcha. All right, take it away.
Yeah, so I'm going to use a modern scenario. We're not going to get into any wizards or anything. We sit down at a table. Normally, you play, you what's called create a character, where you envision this fictional person that you are controlling or pretending to be. Just like in an improv comedy show, you would adopt a persona. Or, Joey's not nearly as cool as he is on the podcast, so this is his persona shining through. We would sort of...
He's an asshole, isn't he? He's just a plain asshole.
I'm never coming back on the show.
It's pretty legit. Keep going. I'm with you.
One player, who is the game master, would describe the current scenario that the players are going to encounter.
And he's dictating it.
Correct.
So is that what you prefer to be? Like, that's the most fun role?
For me, it is, because I get to talk the whole time. If you're not the game master, you have to wait your turn, and I'm not about that. I want to talk the whole time. So the game master would dictate the scenario, and then after a short description would say, players, what do you want to do? And then the players describe what they want to do, and then the game master tells them what happens after that, and that cycle continues until the game is over. The fun part for me is that you play for 2 or 3 hours during a session. Next session, you pick up where you left off. So each game is like an episode of television that you're writing, and games can go on for years if the players are invested. And the story changes every week, and new things continue to happen, and you share in this collaborative adventure.
Gotcha. And so a lot of what you're describing, the digital world has taken and run with it, correct? Like, there's a lot of games that, like, what's the one that you and Andrew used to play a lot of?
RuneScape?
What's that?
RuneScape?
Gosh, what's the biggest? It was a huge thing that all the kids played. Maybe you guys didn't play it. What's it called? Not Fortnite, but
Call of Duty?
No.
I don't know. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know.
Gosh, you create
Pac-Man?
worlds.
How old are you, Joey?
Pac-Man, Cubert, Dig Dug. Yes, Dig Dug.
Yes, that's what it was.
Donkey Kong was really bad. He threw things at people.
I love it.
All right, so I still don't get the game master saying, what do you want to do? What are you talking about? What do you mean?
Right. So let's play through a scenario then. Okay. So you wake up in the morning, and Priscilla...
Are you playing game master right now?
I am playing game master. I'm going to introduce the scenario, and Joey, you're the only player.
Okay.
All right. Amy, you're safe. Don't worry.
Yep.
Priscilla grabs you by the arm and says, Joey, the kids are hungry, and we're out of milk. I need you to go get milk from the store and come right back as soon as you can. Because if these kids don't get pancakes, they're going to ruin my whole day.
Ruin my whole day.
Ruin my whole day. That's what Priscilla says, right?
Right.
She's very doom and gloom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so. She's
so
negative Nancy.
That's right, exactly. Which is a contrast to your shining optimism.
Right.
you got it backwards.
So you jump in your car, you go to the grocery store, you get your cart, and you're going down the aisles trying to figure out where the milk is in this bougie grocery store. And when you turn the corner to the milk aisle, you see an older woman has taken all of the milk, all of it, and put it into 2 or 3 carts. And she's trying to wrestle these carts and move them down towards the checkout line. She's taken all the almond milk, all the 2%, all the whole milk, everything. Put them in all these carts.
I'm like really pissed.
What do you
You're
do?
doing a good job, man.
Yeah,
She's already invested.
Right? What do you...
You've already got demons around you. The demons got you.
You're
done.
lactose intolerant. You're safe. Don't worry.
I don't drink milk, but I'm getting real pissed about the lady who wants it all.
Amy's like, I love role-playing games.
This is why you can't do it.
I know.
It already happened.
Big mistake.
Now, real quick before you go on, is there a time when a player like me is like, oh, that's bullshit. I hate that, man. That's the dumbest scenario. Like, is there ever someone that complains about the thing that you just, I don't want to do that, man. That's dumb. Like,
it can happen.
Yeah.
Usually you sit down and talk to the players beforehand what you want to do.
Okay, gotcha.
So we might say, like, do we want to play a game where we storm the castle like Princess Bride, or do we want to play like Spec Ops Mercenaries taking out a secret target or something?
All right, so the lady trying to buy all that
The
milk.
lady's got all the milk in her cart, and she's trying to struggle to get them towards the checkout line. Joey, you need the milk. What do you do? How do you handle this situation?
So I would probably go up to her and say, hey, you've got more than enough milk. I just would like one of those because my kids are going to die. And can I please have one of them?
Well, they're not going to die, liar.
No, that's a great strategy. Okay. So you lie to the woman, and she looks at you and takes all this in, and she says, young man, I don't have nearly enough milk for what I need to do. If you see any more, could you bring it to me? Because I'm desperately short. And then she goes back to struggling with the carts.
Well, out of curiosity, I would want to know, why do you need so much daggone milk? But then I think at some point I would feel justified to just grab one and say, stop me.
Okay.
I'm going to go through the line. I've got one of these milk. You take the other 50.
Mm-hmm.
See, I've learned from you, Amy.
Right.
That's not what I would do at all.
I'm stepping up to the plate, man. I'm a man.
I'm proud of you, Joey. You're ready to steal from an old woman. You've grown a lot today. At this point, I would ask you to roll to say, can you take the milk without her noticing? And you would roll the die, and depending on what happens, she might notice and scream and fight, and you have to explain to the officer why an old woman was pelting you with milk.
So you've already written down what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 mean? Like, so if I roll a 6, how do you know what that means?
Right. The rules of the game would tell us, on a 6, you succeed. On a 4, you fail. On a 2, you succeed, but the milk is the wrong kind, and Priscilla's upset.
Ooh, so you're saying you write books to think all that out?
No. So here's what's interesting. I had that scenario planned for this podcast because I figured we'd do a demo. I did not know what you would do. I did not know if you would say, well, I'll help her out to the parking lot, and then when I'm loading it in for her, I'll keep one for myself.
No, that's terrible.
So I didn't know what you would do. I just knew the initial setup. That's how the RPGs work, is the dungeon master or the game master brings half of a story to the players, and then their decisions determine what happens. And you might say something totally unexpected, and I have to pause the game and say, now what would happen if Joey pulled out a switchblade and threatened the old woman? I have to think about that for a second. And we might talk about it together as a group. Say, do we want this to get violent?
Yeah.
Should she pull a Glock?
Is it an asshole move if I were to say, okay, you want to give me that? I'd take a knife and cut her head off. And
I think that's probably ruining the game.
I'd get locked up. Like is that like a messed up move? Oh, well, you just ruined it because everybody knows now the cops are going to come. Game over.
That's a faux pas.
Yeah.
Because ideally, beforehand, we talked about, oh, I want to play a game where I have to navigate awkward social situations. Oh, well, here's a great game for that. But if you immediately pulled out your Glock and started to mow down everybody in the grocery store, we're not playing that game anymore. Right. So communication is key. And it's common to pause the game and say, what do we really want? What is this goal that we have? And how can we all contribute towards that?
Yeah.
But that we've played an RPG. That's the basic structure of every RPG, from the Star Trek role-playing game to Dungeons and Dragons.
With what you just set up, if you brought someone else into it, it could be anything from Amy also needs some of that milk, or Amy, you actually know this lady from your workplace, right, and have no idea why she needs all this milk. What would you do? Sort of thing. Like you can just, so you're creating a narrative, and then we're responding.
I don't understand why you don't offer to help her and say, in exchange for me helping you to get to the
I just wanted to have
checkout counter, can I
make
have
my
one
own
of these
decisions in
milks?
this role playing game?
We'll play with Amy, you and I will play later. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
I feel like that was like set up perfectly to be like, help her and then ask to have one. But don't help her if she doesn't give you one. Mm-mm.
That to me is the beauty of the game, because the most obvious choice to one person is not the obvious choice to another person, is a completely random choice to me. And so that's why when you collaborate, no one knows what's going to happen, because we all have some idea, but the person next to you could say something totally ridiculous, and you don't know, and that's the fun.
Yeah.
How deep do people get in character, though?
Everything from doing a bad Scottish accent as a dwarf to wearing costumes.
That creeps me out. That's where I'm like, weird.
So there's some people take it so far as they're acting it out.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that something that you do?
I don't. I prefer a dry game,
right?
Where I describe what I'm doing. Oh, the old woman does this, but I don't say, "Young man, would you please get me my milk?"
That would freak me out.
See?
A bunch
I'd be like,
of
I'm
people.
out. Like,
Yeah,
this is
I
weird.
don't enjoy that. But some people do.
You will gather how many people together and do this stuff?
Usually 3 or 4 players, and then the game master.
The game master, 3 or 4 players, and so you have 7 different volumes of collections of games people can play?
Yes, I've published 7 different. Some are games with rules and dice, and some of them are just adventures for other games.
What does that mean? Adventures for other games.
So in this fictional game we've been playing called Navigating Awkward Situations, the grocery store book could be a book that has a dozen different grocery store related scenarios. And if you want to play in a grocery store, you buy the grocery store pack. I sell books that are different kinds of adventures ready to go.
Yeah. Is your wife into this stuff?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So basically, you come home and she happened to not be with you this time around. So y'all would have a conversation like, oh, man, listen to this story that's unfolding with what I just came from. Check this out.
Yep.
And you basically tell her the story that you guys developed.
Sharing the story that you build together is one of the fun parts of the hobby, because you can tell other people, oh, this is what happened. And to you, it's like you saw it in a movie, but you were a contributor to that. But you didn't write the whole thing yourself. So it was just as exciting and unexpected to you as it was to everyone else at the table.
Are there people that journal all the stories they're a part of so they can not forget them and go back and...
Yep.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of popular books started out as tabletop role-playing game adventures. Have you seen The Expanse series? It's a sci-fi show. It started out as a tabletop role-playing game, and they decided it would be a good book series.
So, yeah, after hearing all of this, what would be your beef with Dungeons and Dragons? I'm just curious. Like, because it sounds like exactly what I did as a kid, just not super structured, but me and my friends pretended like we were other stuff all the time, and we made up storylines as we went along.
Yeah, and I think obviously there are role-playing games that are, I would say, benign. You know, like they're like, it doesn't sound like you're out there trying to tap into something scary Jerry, but I do think like Dungeons and Dragons, like even if you go back and look in their history of like who owned them and what it was, I mean, there is a lot of stuff dealing with Lord of the Rings, and like they had to like change, they couldn't say like hobbits or dwarfs or something because like that's trademarked, they didn't want to get in trouble. I mean, but they have definitely called things in Dungeons and Dragons like demons, and the point was evil. And you know, like I said, there are like spells that are actual real spells. And so I mean, I think that kind of dabbling into that kind of thing is not healthy, it's not good, I don't think it's necessary. That kind of thing to me is wrong.
Gotcha.
If you can do a role-playing game and it's benign, it's just, you know, imaginary, I don't think that necessarily is wrong.
But for Dungeons and Dragons, if you're purely in it for the fun and entertainment, you would say, yeah, but it's got evil roots.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, like, if somebody designs something in a negative way, just don't dabble with that. You know, I think... I think a lot of things can be redeemed and used for good. And so I think, you know, what you're saying is, hey, I believe in Christ and I think there's a way to do this without the gross. I don't want to be a part of what represents something evil or that, would trip somebody up or would be, in like Thessalonians, it'll say like, don't even do anything with the appearance of evil, So, I mean, I feel like you're talking about doing it in a way that there isn't anything negative about it. There isn't any root or anything that's looking to be destructive.
Yeah. Can you substantiate a little more thoroughly what she's referring to as people that want to cross over into a spiritual dimension? So take the example, and maybe it would be hard to use the example that you just did since it doesn't have to do with like witches and stuff, but is that accurate that sometimes in these role-playing games, the goal is to tap into some sort of a spiritual deal and hope that weird stuff happens?
I'm sure there's someone somewhere playing Candyland hoping to connect to the spiritual realm. I have never participated in or heard of a game where Dungeons and Dragons was an attempt to connect to a greater power. I've only known it as a fun way to hang out with your friends and tell a story together. I do understand that makes people uncomfortable. Having magic in a game, for example, or having demons or goblins or those sorts of things. If that makes you uncomfortable, don't feel like you have to play Dungeons and Dragons. There's a lot of great role-playing games out there. I wrote a really cool space western one that's like you're a gunslinger in space and you hunt down bad guys and you save towns. That's great. I do think that Dungeons and Dragons is not inherently evil. I would not call it a sin because, again, there's that aspect that all the players bring to the table. The contributions add up to the shared story. The game itself has very little weight. I do think there's an interesting discussion to be had sort of along the lines of like Harry Potter, of if you cast a spell in like a video game, is that like casting a spell in real life? Or, if you watch a movie about magic, does that harm you spiritually?
I think that's a really good point, because when my daughter started to read Harry Potter back in the day, my oldest daughter was really nervous about it and I didn't want it in my house. So when she was at her dad's, that's when she would like devour it and read it and, whatever. Then by the time the movies came out, it was like, I didn't watch them at first and then eventually like I did. And I mean, I do enjoy Harry Potter movies, but then I found out later, a Christian friend of mine, I think it might have been Louis, was like, those spells are real spells. And then I started to get really conscientious about it. Like I was like, it's just like one of those things where I don't think necessarily people playing Dungeons and Dragons are like trying to reach into like the demonic field in any way, but I think you're just opening doors that should stay shut. I just think as Christians, we're supposed to guard our hearts and minds in Christ. We're supposed to renew our minds daily in his word. And I just think that like repeatedly diving into something that is not Christ-like is not fruitful. I don't think scary movies are good. Like how we're talking about that. I mean, I just think it's just opening a realm, opening yourself up to something that we're not intended to saturate ourselves with, And I don't think necessarily like, Harry Potter waving a wand. Like, I don't think if you watch that, like you need to go and repent or anything. I don't think that necessarily in and of itself is a sin, but I think you just need to be really careful and, ask God for you and for your comfort level, like how you were saying, like, I'm not cool with tarot cards, like me neither. I wouldn't tolerate that. So I think each one of us has, sensitivity to the Holy Spirit and where he would say, this is not for you, and for me, like Harry Potter just isn't something at this point, I wouldn't go back and rewatch. I would feel uncomfortable.
Would you be uncomfortable because we're going to try to speak to the dead here in a second. Would you be uncomfortable with that?
Joey, of course I would. Seances are bad.
He's joking about dead people again.
Oh, yeah.
You have any any response to just kind of her framework?
No, I want to reiterate, if something makes you uncomfortable, don't do it. There's a great verse. I can't remember if it's Romans or one of the other epistles, but the one of the big debates at that time was eating food sacrificed to idols. The idea is that food is tainted, it is spiritually impure, and Christians should not eat it, versus people are starving, Christians are to feed the poor, this food could feed the poor. Paul doesn't really give us a hard line on that. He sort of says, if something bothers you, don't do it. But you can't point to someone else and say, hey, you're sinning because that bothers me. And I think this kind of lands in that line of like, if Harry Potter makes someone uncomfortable, they should not watch it. But I would hesitate for them to like accuse someone else of sinning if they watch Harry Potter.
I agree. In Colossians 2, I think, is where Paul talks a lot about similarly like what you're talking about. He's like, listen, you're not under, like, he's telling the church there, like, they were believing in like worshiping angels and some other things. And he's like, listen, here's the deal. Like, you don't have to, people were pressuring the Gentiles to live Jewish. And they were saying, here are dietary restrictions and this and that. He's like, that's not for you. Like, don't fall under that. Like, you can eat what you want. Like, you're not under these restrictions anymore. But at the same time, Paul also says things like, if it has the appearance of evil, stay clear of it. Or he'll say, like, don't trip up your brother. But then he also says to the, like, less mature brother that you could be tripping up, like, also don't be a jerk, you know, like, and so I think Paul even has some degree there of trying to explain a difficult issue of saying, like, we don't want to be a stumbling block for someone, but at the same time, it's not your job to tell me what I'm doing wrong. It's the same thing as, like, you know, the speck in the log, like, or the splinter in the log, you know, like, we have enough to worry about of ourselves that it's not my business what you're doing. You know what I mean? If we're not in community together and you're not asking me to hold you accountable, that's just not my role, you know?
Yep. That's where I would be with horror movies. For me personally, they don't affect me. I enjoy them. But I understand the pushback, you know? I mean, because we had this conversation on the Seacoast podcast where my friend Lynn, I mean, she sees it as a moral line. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not right for anybody. And, you know, I hesitate to mark almost any form of entertainment that way.
Well, so when I started listening to that podcast, and I've listened to all of them, I stopped because it was, the beginning was pro and I couldn't stomach it. Gotcha. So I turned it off and I couldn't even listen. And then, you know how, like, when you're listening to podcasts and it'll pick up on the one, like, once the current the episode stops, it'll pick up at the next one where you left off, and it's the only unplayed one, so it picked that up. And I was like, oh.
Sounds like you're not a true fan.
I know. and then I got to hear Lynn's side of it, and I was so thankful because I was like, okay, so there's another side. And I do lean a lot, like, I agreed with a lot of the points that Lynn made.
Yeah.
Didn't really agree with any of the points that were for it. Mm-hmm. I just think we use the word entertainment very lightly. And I think we do need to understand, like, you are, you know, whatever goes in comes out. You know, you can't, if you dump over a cup of milk, it's milk. If you dump over water, it's water. So it's like whatever's in you is going to come out, and you do need to be careful.
Yeah. And I think everybody's wired up differently, especially how they see spiritual stuff. I really resonate with David when he talks about, and I definitely am not insinuating you have less faith by any means, but I take the same approach.
I win, Amy.
Some people would see it as lackadaisical and lazy, and maybe it is, but I really do feel like I belong to God. You know, I don't have to be afraid. And I think it may be because I was brought up into the satanic, scary, and it once I felt free from that, it's like the pendulum swang the other way. Have I ever watched a movie that bothered me and I turned it off? Yes. Mm-hmm. But I didn't turn it off because I was afraid that some sort of spirit from the movie was going to come inside of me like I would have as a kid. You know what I'm saying?
And I don't worry about that part of it. What I do worry about is when it comes to scary movies, what I worry about is, like, the gore part of it, the violence part of it. A lot of times there's sexual overtones to it. I mean, honestly, none of it is glorifying God. Like, I don't think he would sit down and be like, this is a cool movie. Like, I think he'd be like, this is really disappointing. This is glorifying things that are not what I came to.
You think Jesus would sit down and watch The Notebook and say, man, this is a cool movie?
I absolutely think he does.
Like The
I
Notebook
love
too.
that movie.
Yeah, I do too.
He's probably, I mean, come on. He loves it. And again, it's each person to themselves. Like, I would not watch anything like Exorcist or anything like that. Like, that stuff is terrifying. Have I watched it? Yes. And I actually watched it when I was too young. I should have never. And it scared me to death. Not that I thought that anything was going to, like, come through the screen on me or anything, but just that it opened my mind to the fact that people could be possessed, and that was terrifying. You know, like, I don't want to think about that. I want to think about, I'm sealed by the blood of the Lamb. I'm sealed with the Holy Spirit. Like, there's no room for another spirit in me. And I really agree with you. And I think you do have a stronger faith when you said, like, the power of Christ resides in me, and I'm not worried that anything else is more powerful than that. Because I think a lot of times in our faith, we do get it wrong that, like, Satan is not God's equal opposite. You know, he's not equal to God in evil as much as God is good. Like, I think he was a created being. He's not as strong as God, obviously. But I think sometimes we do give him too much credit that, you know, it's this dueling good and evil because they're close in power, and like, who's going to edge out the win. And I do think that is, to me, your faith is stronger, that you're like, I'm not afraid of that. Whereas for me, I'm like, that does make me nervous. Like, I'm not comfortable with it. Not that I don't think God could absolutely protect me from that. I just don't want to even open myself up to it.
So you would say in this matter, David has more faith?
I mean, I think if he,
and that's why he's comfortable with it?
No, I don't think, not necessarily with like the role playing, but I'm thinking like when he's saying like, if someone came in with tarot cards, I'm not afraid of that. Like, to me, that shows a lot of faith. Like, he believes like, God's got me. I'm not afraid of that. And it's not that I don't think God has me, but it still just makes me really uncomfortable.
I would also agree with you that the things that we consume and the things that we partake in do affect us. I don't know if I'd have the confidence to say spiritually, but definitely mentally, physically, because we have a close relationship with God. That's a part of the things that affect us. I have definitely watched a lot of movies that I regret watching and that still terrify me, just the memory of those. And I have done a lot of things that I should not have done that harmed me. So I'm definitely with you in that we need to be careful what we take in. I'm just excited to share all the goodness and all the beauty that I've had with role-playing games with other people, and to sort of dissolve that stigma, because I grew up believing that was wrong, and I wish I had gotten into role-playing games way earlier, because it wasn't until I got into role-playing games that I found a love for writing, publishing. I have game nights twice a week with a bunch of different friends. It's a way that I connect with online communities. It has been such a huge I never created anything before I started playing role-playing games. I just assumed I was not a creative person. I didn't draw, I didn't write, I didn't do anything. But once I started telling stories with my friends, it unlocked that within me. And now I feel very creative. I feel inspired. And I feel God's hand upon that, showing me the incredible things that he has for me in this world. And I would hate for someone to avoid RPGs because of that fear.
Uh-huh.
And I would say, go grab a Star Trek RPG, or go grab, like, you know, whatever movie or show or book series that you like. There's probably a role-playing game similar to that you could enjoy with your friends and tell stories with them.
Yeah. Would you say that the community that you've acquired with your involvement in RPGs is an added benefit or your aim?
Definitely a benefit.
Yeah. So the aim is still to have fun with the story.
Correct. I meet a lot of people through RPGs, both the writing and the selling and the playing, and they are a positive benefit to my life. But I think just like if you love to play soccer and you love your team, you would play soccer with other people, not just your team. But if you like the people, you know, I'm not going to go like to a barbecue with a bunch of strangers, but I'll play Dungeons and Dragons with some strangers, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. This has been awesome.
I have a quick question too. Like,
we're done.
Do you feel
all done?
Stop. Do you feel jerk? Do you feel any obligation to use it as like a form of ministry at all? Like, to show like, hey, there are positives in this realm where there may be some negatives as well.
That's the reason that I'm on the podcast. Or do you mean do you feel like I have a calling to make this my mission field? Is that what you're getting at?
Like, does Seacoast need a Dungeons and Dragons ministry department?
Okay, I would be down with you saying anything but Dungeons and Dragons, like
role-playing games.
Yes, Joey, because I think Dungeons and Dragons is BAD.
That spells bad.
But I think like there's a lot of things that Christ redeems, and I think if maybe someone set out to like make role playing games and to do wrong with them, like, do you feel like you're able to turn that around?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Whether or not we're playing Dungeons and Dragons, I believe that role-playing games are a positive way to connect with people you wouldn't normally connect with, to build community, and to create connections that can lead to deeper friendships. A lot of the people that I've played D&D with, I'm their only Christian friend. And that is a great honor to me. And I feel like this is a good benefit of something that I already have a passion for.
Now, when you said you've rubbed shoulders with people in the occult, how do you feel about that?
I think a lot of that stuff makes me uncomfortable. My main distributor is a company called Spearwitch, and they sell a lot of occult material. And my books are up on the shelf right next to the Ouija boards and the tarot cards and the 101 spells you can do with your family book. And
I'm like sweating.
And that stuff makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that my books are up there.
Yeah.
Like maybe someone will grab yours and not.
Yeah, and maybe they'll have a great time. And again, just like with Harry Potter, I hesitate to point to the tarot cards and say, this is always bad and nothing good can come from it. Because I see people do that to me with D&D or to other people with Harry Potter. And we've seen good things come out of that. So I don't know where the line is for the spiritual harm, but it definitely freaks me out.
Yeah.
How can people track down your books and stuff? You have a website?
I do. All my stuff is available from technicalgrimoire.com.
Cool. Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes too.
And then put like www.jd.
Do you have an Etsy store, Amy, that we can...
No.
Do you have a Christian bookstore that you
I'm
want
like,
to
what if
shout
they
out?
get on that website and then they're like, look at all this like
Just a link.
evilness, and I'm like,
I'll put a link to anointing oil for
Yeah.
you can get some.
Put some Bibles on there, Joey.
you. Yeah, definitely. You should come up with your own line of anointing oil. A little picture of Amy.